Excuse me, there must be
Intro, so
some
what?
mistake.
How
The
dare you?
sharp crack
I
of the
am the
gavel
CEO.
echoed across courtroom 7B, a sound meant to silence every breath in the room. Judge Marcus Thompson, with his
You don't
cold
belong
and
here.
commanding tone, announced the ruling. Motion to suppress evidence is denied. The words hung heavy, leaving the defense side with little room to maneuver. But before the quiet could settle, defense attorney Kesha Washington stepped forward, her posture steady, her voice cutting through the tension like steel. "Your Honor," she said firmly, "I have new evidence that completely exonerates my client." The judge's expression twisted instantly, rage flashing in his eyes. His lips curled into something more like a snarl than a frown. "You don't know who you're dealing with, Counselor," Thompson snapped. His gaze shifted to his enforcer, Bailiff Derek Miller, and with a slight nod, the order was given. Without a word of warning, Miller lunged forward. His fist connected with Kesha's mouth in a brutal strike that resounded like another gavel crack, this one of violence instead of law. The courtroom gasped in unison, journalists fumbled for their cameras, and jurors froze in disbelief. Kesha stumbled, her lip split open, blood running bright and fast. The room exploded into chaos. "Remove her for contempt of court," Thompson bellowed, his voice dripping with fury, as if Kesha herself had committed a crime by daring to stand against him. Clutching her bleeding mouth, Kesha straightened her back. Despite the pain searing through her face, her eyes burned with defiance. "Your Honor," she warned, her voice steady even through the throbbing ache, "you're making a grave mistake." No one in that courtroom realized it yet, but this shocking display of judicial violence would become the turning point. It would rip open decades of buried corruption, unraveling threads of bribery, intimidation, and systemic abuse of power that had long poisoned Jefferson County's justice system. And at the center of it all was the battered briefcase still clutched in Kesha's hands, holding evidence powerful enough to bring an empire crashing down. Whispers surged like a current through the gallery. Some spectators pressed their hands over their mouths in shock. Others muttered nervously, while reporters scribbled frantic notes. Court reporter Sandra Mills's fingers flew across her stenograph, documenting every vicious detail. At the back, Channel 7 news correspondent Michael Johnson discreetly activated his recording device, recognizing that he was witnessing history. "Your Honor," Kesha spoke again, her voice stronger than the bloodied state of her lips suggested, "I demand this assault be entered into the official court record." Judge Thompson's eyes flashed dangerously. "Ms. Washington, you are in contempt." Bailiff Miller was maintaining order in my courtroom. The absurdity of his claim sent ripples of disbelief through the crowd. Washington's colleagues, James Rodriguez and Patricia Chen, sat in the front row, their faces etched with horror. They had seen bias before, but never outright violence, never a judge weaponizing a bailiff in full public view. At the defense table, Damon Harris, Kesha's 23-year-old client, stared wide-eyed. Wrongfully accused of armed robbery, Damon had pinned his hopes on the one attorney willing to fight for him. Now she stood bloodied before him, assaulted for daring to defend his innocence. The irony was sharp and painful. The courtroom meant to deliver justice had itself become the scene of injustice. Meanwhile, Miller stood smugly by the judge's bench, his knuckles still flushed red from the impact. At 45, this former police officer had spent 8 years as Thompson's personal enforcer, using fear, fists, and intimidation to silence anyone who dared push too far. Judge Thompson banged the gavel again, desperate to regain control of the spiraling chaos. "This court will take a 15-minute recess," he declared, though his voice carried a nervous edge. But control was already slipping. Spectators surged toward Kesha, offering support and vowing to testify about the assault. Among them, Dr. Patricia Adams, a psychiatrist attending court on another matter, rushed to her side. She examined the split lip, whispering, "That's going to require stitches and possibly dental work." Her gentle voice contrasted sharply with the violence that had just unfolded. Kesha sat quietly, mind racing. She had expected Thompson to resist her evidence, but not with physical violence. Yet the very desperation he showed only confirmed what she had long suspected. Her evidence had struck at the heart of his corruption. And now everyone in that courtroom had seen his mask slip. By the time news of the assault reached the courthouse lobby, chaos had erupted. Court officers gathered in hushed, urgent conversations, while attorneys scrambled to witness what was already being described as unprecedented. Security Chief Robert Davis initiated lockdown procedures, sealing entrances as media vans screeched into the lot outside. "This is Michael Johnson reporting live from the Jefferson County Courthouse," the reporter announced into his camera, "where an explosive confrontation has just unfolded. Defense attorney Kesha Washington was physically assaulted by a bailiff inside the courtroom itself." Back in 7B, jury foreman William Martinez approached court clerk Helen Foster, his voice shaking with concern. "Ma'am, we need to discuss what we just saw." "This changes everything about this trial." The other jurors huddled in their deliberation room, faces pale and unsettled. "I've never seen anything like it," said Maria Santos, an elementary school teacher, her voice trembling. "A bailiff attacking a lawyer right in front of us." Retired construction worker Bobby Thompson shook his head grimly. "That judge is dirty." "You don't react that violently unless you're hiding something." The jurors exchanged nods of uneasy agreement. The assault had shifted their entire perception, not just of the case, but of the court itself. Meanwhile, in the courthouse medical office, Dr. Adams cleaned Kesha's wounds carefully. 4 stitches were required, and her cheek was swelling rapidly, but Washington's eyes burned brighter than ever. "Ms. Washington," Sandra Mills whispered as she entered, holding her stenograph notes close. Every word was recorded. The official transcript will show exactly what happened. She hesitated, then leaned closer. "And I've seen Judge Thompson do questionable things before. If you need testimony, I'm ready." Moments later, Rodriguez and Chen burst through the door, voices raised in outrage. "Kesha, are you okay?" "This is insanity," Rodriguez declared. "We're filing complaints with the State Bar, the Judicial Commission, the FBI, everyone." "The FBI," Kesha repeated slowly, a knowing smile tugging at her bruised face. "That's exactly who needs to see what I have." She unclasped the battered briefcase, carefully pulling it open. Inside lay dozens of documents and a small digital recorder. Even in her wounded state, she knew this moment was bigger than the assault. The attack had turned the spotlight on Thompson, but the evidence inside her briefcase would burn his empire of corruption to the ground. One lie turned the cabin into a courtroom. Sarah's smile tightened as she gestured toward the rows behind. "We do have excellent options available in first class, Mr. Mitchell. Perhaps 3C? It's an aisle with plenty of leg room, and I'd be happy to ensure you receive priority service as compensation for the inconvenience." Devon tilted his head, his voice calm but steady. "The inconvenience? You mean the fact that someone is sitting in my assigned seat?" Victoria seized the moment like a lifeline. "I think that's very reasonable," she chimed in quickly. "I've already settled here, and as I said, my connecting flight requires me to be on this side. Surely Mr. Mitchell understands that sometimes travellers need to be flexible." Sarah nodded encouragingly, as if Victoria's demand were rational. Mrs. Hartwell does have a point. "We've found the best solutions are those that minimize disruption." Devon glanced around. The cabin was no longer pretending not to watch. Faces revealed discomfort, curiosity, even quiet recognition. An older black couple in row 4 exchanged looks that said we've been here before. In row 3, a Latina woman with a press badge studied the scene intently, her phone angled discreetly, likely recording. And near the window in row 5, a young Asian woman's phone glowed with a live stream interface, her fingers racing as she broadcast to strangers online. Devon drew a slow breath, then answered, "I appreciate the suggestion, but I'd like to sit in my assigned seat, the one I purchased, the one clearly printed on my boarding pass." Sarah's professional veneer cracked slightly. "Mr. Mitchell, I understand, but I'm trying to find a solution that works for everyone. Mrs. Hartwell is one of our most valued customers, and I'm not," Devon interrupted gently, the question hanging like a blade. Sarah faltered, caught mid-sentence, unable to answer without revealing bias. Victoria filled the silence, voice sharp. "Oh, please. This is absurd. I've flown Pinnacle for over a decade. I know the crew. I know the procedures. I booked this seat, and I won't be moved because of some mistake." Devon's phone buzzed again in his pocket. Likely another message from Kai, his assistant, wondering about the delay. He ignored it. The irony struck him. He was being urged to give up his own seat, while updates about his own airline flashed on his phone. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, his voice calm but carrying new steel. "You keep mentioning how long you've flown with Pinnacle. Let me ask you, in all those years, how many times have you refused to vacate a seat assigned to someone else?" Her eyes flared with anger. "I'm not refusing anything. I'm sitting in the seat I booked, as any reasonable person would." "Except you didn't book this seat," Devon pointed out evenly. "If you had, your boarding pass would show 2A. It doesn't. You're sitting here hoping your status will let you take what you want." Sarah stepped between them, nervousness seeping into her tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's all take a step back. I'm sure we can resolve this without—" "I'm not upset," Devon said, his voice low but clear. "I'm just tired. Tired of being told that someone else's comfort matters more than my rightful reservation." Victoria laughed, sharp and cutting. "Your confirmed reservation? Please. We know what this is really about. You're trying to stir up a scene for compensation. I've seen this before." Her words hit the cabin like a thunderclap. Eyes widened, heads turned. Devon could feel every gaze fixed on him, waiting for his response to being branded a fraud in public. He let the silence stretch, then spoke quietly. "You have no idea what you just started." The air changed instantly. The tension thickened, buzzing like static. This was no longer a dispute over seating. It was a confrontation about dignity, about race, about power. Sarah Chen's composure cracked. Her hand twitched toward the intercom, debating whether to call the cockpit. "Perhaps I should get Captain Rodriguez involved," she said, her cheerfulness strained thin. "He has authority to resolve this." Victoria's face lit with smug triumph. "Yes, excellent idea. Let's bring in the captain. He'll explain procedures to Mr. Mitchell. Devon inclined his head. Please do. I'd very much like to speak with someone in authority. As Sarah moved toward the cockpit, a new voice rang out clear and firm. Excuse me. I couldn't help noticing. All eyes shifted to row 3, where the Latina woman with silver-streaked black hair raised her press badge. I'm Elena Vasquez, senior correspondent for the Washington Post. I cover transportation and civil rights. What I just witnessed was discrimination, plain and simple. Victoria's jaw dropped. Excuse me? This is none of your business. Elena's smile was razor-sharp. Actually, it's very much my business. A black man with a legitimate boarding pass is being denied his seat because a white woman refuses to move. That's a civil rights issue. The young woman in row 5, Zoe Kim, lifted her phone higher. I've been live streaming since the start. 500 people are watching now, and let me tell you, they don't like what they're seeing. Victoria whipped around, red-faced. You've been filming. That's illegal. I don't consent. Zoe shrugged, defiant. This is a public space. I'm documenting what looks like a civil rights violation. My viewers are invested. Civil rights violation, Victoria sputtered. This is just a seating mix-up. You people are blowing it out of proportion. The phrase you people detonated like a bomb. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Devon felt a cold focus settle inside him. Eleanor's pen scratched across her notepad. Did you just say you people, Mrs. Hartwell? In the context of a racial dispute? Victoria blanched. That's not what I meant. I meant journalists, social media. I'm not racist. Devon spoke at last, his voice hard, steady, unyielding. Mrs. Hartwell, you've accused me of scheming, dismissed my boarding pass, and now used you people. If you're not racist, you're doing a remarkable impression of one. How dare you, she snapped. I have black friends. I donate to charity. I would never. You would never what? Elena cut in. Never assume a black man doesn't belong in first class. Never treat his presence as fraudulent, because that's exactly what you've done. Before Victoria could respond, the cockpit door opened. Captain James Rodriguez emerged, a veteran pilot with silver hair and an air of command. Sarah trailed behind him, visibly relieved. Good afternoon, Rodriguez said. I hear we have a seating issue preventing departure. Let's resolve this quickly. Victoria leapt up, hand extended. Captain, thank you. I'm Victoria Hartwell, Pinnacle Platinum. There's been some mistake with the assignments, and this man refuses to be reasonable. The captain turned to Devon. And you are? Devon handed him the boarding pass. Devon Mitchell. Assigned to 2A. Mrs. Hartwell refuses to move. Rodriguez examined the pass, then nodded. Yes, this seat is yours. But Mrs. Hartwell is a long-standing customer. Perhaps we can find an accommodation that satisfies both parties. Devon's jaw tightened. Accommodation? You mean I should give up my seat for her convenience? The captain shifted, uncomfortable. We do have other open seats in first class. Sometimes flexibility helps avoid escalation. Elena's voice cut sharply across the cabin. Captain Rodriguez, are you suggesting that Mr. Mitchell give up his assigned seat so Mrs. Hartwell can keep the one she took? Because if that's Pinnacle Airways policy, I'd like it on the record. The captain froze, realizing the journalist's presence changed everything. Victoria smirked, misreading the moment. Yes, let's be clear. I won't be moved. Real first-class passengers don't dress like him. He probably got his ticket through affirmative action. The cabin gasped again, shock echoing through the rows. Devon rose slowly, his full height commanding the aisle. His voice was quiet, but everyone leaned in to hear. "Captain Rodriguez, ground this aircraft, now." Rodriguez blinked, stunned. "Excuse me." Devon pulled out his phone, swiping to an app bearing the Pinnacle Airways logo. "I didn't ask. I own this airline, and we're not moving until this is resolved." Gasps, murmurs. Zoe's livestream viewer count surged. Victoria's face drained of colour. "What do you mean? You own?" Devon turned his gaze on her, cold and steady. "Mrs. Hartwell, allow me to introduce myself properly. I'm Devon Mitchell, CEO of Skitech Innovations. I own 65% of Pinnacle Airways, and right now you're sitting in my seat, on my plane." The truth hit harder than turbulence. The silence in the cabin was deafening. Every passenger froze, eyes glued to Devon, as if he had just announced that gravity no longer applied. The hum of the aircraft systems was the only sound, underscoring the shock settling over first class. Elena Vasquez's eyes lit with the unmistakable gleam of a journalist who had stumbled onto a once-in-a-lifetime scoop. "You're Devon Mitchell, the Skitech CEO, the one who's been on the covers of Forbes and Fortune?" Her pen was already scratching furiously across her notepad. Devon gave a curt nod. "The same. And since you raised the question earlier, Mrs. Hartwell, yes, I am qualified to sit in this seat. In fact, my company built the reservation system that issued your boarding pass. The very system that logged you into this flight. The same software that ensures every seat is accounted for, including 2A. Victoria's mouth worked soundlessly. Her face had drained of colour, her manicured hands clutching her designer bag as if it could shield her from the weight of the revelation. But you're dressed like," she faltered, "like someone who doesn't belong here." Devon's gaze hardened. "Like someone who doesn't wear wealth on their sleeve. Like someone whose place in first class needs to be justified. That's the problem, Mrs. Hartwell. You didn't recognize me as a CEO because you couldn't recognize me as a person worthy of respect." Captain Rodriguez shifted uneasily, clearly replaying the last 20 minutes in his head. He had suggested compromise, had urged flexibility, without realizing he was essentially asking the owner of the airline to surrender his rights. His radio crackled, tower control confirming. "CEO override confirmed. Flight 1847 return to gate immediately." Rodriguez's face flushed. "Tower confirm again? Did you say CEO override?" "Affirmative," came the response. "Instruction from corporate. Return to gate immediately." The passengers gasped again, the reality sinking in. The man Victoria Hartwell had mocked, accused and dismissed wasn't just another traveller. He was the majority owner, and he had just grounded the aircraft with a single command. Sarah Chen, the flight attendant who had first suggested Devon move to keep the peace, looked stricken. "Mr. Mitchell, sir, I didn't know. I was just trying to defuse the situation." "You were trying to make the problem disappear," Devon interrupted smoothly. "And the way you chose to do that was to ask the black passenger to compromise. That's how you were trained. Find the person who looks like they have the least power and pressure them to bend, so the one with the most privilege never has to face consequences." The words cut through the cabin like a blade. Several passengers lowered their eyes, ashamed, recognizing the truth in what he said. Zoe Kim's phone buzzed loudly as notifications poured in. Her live stream had exploded, surging past 5,000 viewers in minutes. "Holy crap," she whispered, quickly correcting herself. "Sorry, this is massive. People are going wild online. The video's already been shared on TikTok and Twitter. #PinnacleShame is trending." Victoria's voice cracked as she tried to recover her footing. I didn't know who you were. I never meant—" "That's the issue," Devon cut in, his tone colder now. "You didn't know who I was. And because of that, you felt justified in treating me as less. You thought status and privilege gave you ownership of a seat that didn't belong to you. But your ignorance doesn't excuse your behavior." Her eyes welled with tears, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "I'm sorry. Truly, I had no idea." "You shouldn't have to know someone's title to treat them with dignity," Devon said sharply. "Respect shouldn't depend on wealth or recognition. The problem isn't that you didn't know I was a CEO. The problem is that you couldn't see me as human." The jet bridge loomed outside as the plane rolled back toward the gate. Beyond the window, Devon could already see a gathering: airport officials, executives in suits, even reporters who had somehow caught wind of the drama unfolding at 30,000 feet. The story had leaked before the wheels even touched back on concrete. Passengers shifted in their seats, whispering among themselves. Some wore embarrassment, others awe. A few seemed almost eager, recognizing that they were witnessing something historic. Devon's phone buzzed. Kai's message lit the screen. "Devon, what's happening?" "Social media is exploding. CNN already picked it up. Call me now." Instead, Devon typed a quick reply. "Handle media inquiries. Draft statement about airline discrimination. Board meeting this afternoon. This changes everything." He looked up, his eyes sweeping the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying authority sharpened by anger but steadied with purpose. "What happened here today wasn't about me being a CEO. It wasn't about money or status. It was about what happens every day to people who look like me. People who are told, subtly or directly, that they don't belong." The words hung heavy in the air. Victoria slumped into her seat, defeated. Sarah Chen avoided Devon's eyes. Captain Rodriguez stood frozen, caught between authority and shame. And Devon Mitchell, the black CEO who owned the very plane they sat in, had turned a simple confrontation into the spark of something much larger. The revolution had begun. A scandal was breaking, but Devon was building a revolution. The tension at Gate C7 was suffocating. Reporters clustered, pens scratching, cameras flashing, microphones shoved forward. Rebecca Santos stood rigid, her polished corporate mask faltering under the weight of Devon's sharp words. "Mr. Mitchell," she said quickly, trying to regain control. "With all due respect, situations like this require internal handling. We have procedures, union contracts, protocols." "Then change the procedures," Devon cut in, his voice cool but merciless. "Suspend Captain Rodriguez and Sarah Chen immediately, pending investigation. Implement mandatory bias training for every customer-facing employee within 60 days. And by the end of this week, I want a full report of every discrimination complaint filed against Pinnacle Airways in the past 5 years, on my desk." Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd. Even journalists paused mid-note, recognizing the gravity of what they had just heard. Rebecca's face drained of color. "Sir, that's not how disciplinary actions are typically handled. Unions don't protect racism," Devon snapped. "This is no longer about typical. This is about accountability." Beside him, Kai's fingers flew across his tablet, capturing Devon's commands in real time. "Drafting directives now," he murmured, eyes flashing with urgency. "Legal and HR will have them before midnight." Elena Vasquez leaned forward, notebook poised. "Mr. Mitchell, are these measures just for Pinnacle, or do you intend broader changes? Your company's software powers most airlines. Is this about one carrier, or the industry as a whole?" Devon didn't hesitate. "This isn't about one flight, or one airline. This is about a system that allows 15,000 discrimination complaints every year to vanish into silence. That ends today." The words struck like thunder. Passengers who had lingered began nodding, murmurs of agreement spreading. Reporters scribbled furiously, the sound of pen on paper mingling with camera clicks. Zoe Kim's phone buzzed violently, her live stream audience soaring into the tens of thousands. Rebecca Santos stepped closer, desperation seeping into her voice. "Mr. Mitchell, please. Consider the broader implications. Thousands of people work here. Policy changes of this magnitude could—" "Ms. Santos," Devon interrupted, fixing her with a stare that brooked no compromise. "Are you suggesting I should tolerate discrimination to protect the company's comfort? Because I won't, not anymore." Her lips parted, but no words came. Around her, executives shifted nervously, clearly unprepared for the direct public dismantling of their old way of doing business. Devon's phone buzzed again. This time he ignored it. Instead, he faced the cameras, his posture tall, his voice unwavering. "Airlines like to bury discrimination under customer service. They call it inconvenience. They call it misunderstanding. But it's neither. It's racism. And starting today, the accountability will be built into the systems they cannot operate without." A hush fell, thick and heavy. Elena Vasquez's pen stilled mid-sentence as she realized she was no longer writing just about a flight delay. She was chronicling the start of an industry-wide civil rights battle. The revolution was no longer waiting. Devon Mitchell had forced it onto the runway. What began in one cabin was now shaking an entire industry. The gate area pulsed with noise, questions hurled, cameras flashing, phones buzzing with constant updates. Zoe Kim stood near the edge of the crowd, her livestream count climbing by the second. What had started as 500 curious viewers had now swelled into tens of thousands. Comments scrolled so fast they blurred. "This is bigger than one flight." Systemic racism caught live. He grounded his own plane. Devon caught Zoe's eyes briefly. She nodded, holding her phone higher, as if silently promising to keep the lens trained on truth. Elena Vasquez pressed forward. "Mr. Mitchell, Skitex software runs the reservation systems for over 70% of airlines. Are you saying you'll integrate anti-discrimination measures directly into that infrastructure?" Devon's voice was steady. "Yes, every complaint will be logged, every incident escalated. Airlines will no longer be able to bury discrimination in local files. The systems they rely on will make accountability unavoidable." The words landed like thunderclaps. Reporters murmured. Some executives paled. Rebecca Santos's face stiffened, her phone pressed tightly to her ear as she whispered urgently into the receiver, clearly relaying Devon's demands to higher powers scrambling to contain the fallout. Kai looked up from his tablet, his voice low but urgent. "Devon, airlines are calling already. United, Delta, American. They're asking for emergency meetings. Some are threatening to pull contracts." Devon almost smiled. "They won't. It would take them years to replace our systems, And every day they resist is another day they face public outrage. They'll fold faster than they think. Zoe's voice carried over the crowd. Mr. Mitchell! My viewers, 75,000 now, they want to know, what about people who face discrimination but don't own airlines? What about them? The question silenced the room. It cut through the corporate jargon, the legal worries, the PR spin. Devon paused, looking at Zoe, then at the scrolling wave of comments flooding her screen. Ordinary people sharing their own stories of humiliation, dismissal, exclusion. That's why this can't be just about me, Devon said finally, his voice softer but resonant. Most people don't have the power to ground a flight. Most people can't command cameras or headlines. But I can, and because I can, I must. Not for me, for them. For everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. The words rippled outward like a stone tossed into water, sending shivers through the gathered crowd. Elena scribbled furiously, her notes no longer a record of events, but the draft of history. Rebecca Santos tried one last time. Mr. Mitchell, please. You're painting the entire industry with a broad brush. Pinnacle alone serves millions every year. The vast majority of those flights end without incident, Devon cut in. Tell me, Ms. Santos, how many discrimination complaints has Pinnacle received this year? Her silence was answer enough. Devon turned to Kai. Kai's fingers flew across his tablet. 847 complaints flagged with discrimination or bias in the past 12 months. Only 23 escalated. 0 resulted in policy changes. Gasps echoed through the terminal. The numbers struck harder than any speech could. Eleanor lifted her gaze from her notepad. Mr. Mitchell, 15,000 complaints industry-wide, only 2% acted on. Are you saying you intend to force airlines to change whether they want to or not? Devon met her eyes without hesitation. Yes, because justice delayed is justice denied, and I'm done watching delay. The cameras kept rolling. Zoe's stream soared past 100,000 viewers. The press corps leaned in closer, sensing history in real time. And Devon Mitchell stood steady in the storm, no longer just a CEO, but the architect of a movement too powerful to be ignored. The fight had left the cabin. It was now rewriting history. The crowd around Gate C7 had swelled. Security kept order, but the atmosphere had shifted from chaos to something else, an audience realizing they were watching history unfold in real time. Zoe Kim's phone glowed bright, her livestream numbers now eclipsing 100,000. The comments scrolled endlessly. My dad was profiled at check-in. Same thing happened to me last year. Finally, someone with power is saying what we've been screaming. Devon glanced at Zoe's screen, reading story after story of humiliation endured quietly until now. His jaw tightened. This is why it has to be bigger than me. Suddenly, a voice called out from the crowd. Mr. Mitchell! A young black woman stepped forward, her voice clear, her presence commanding despite her age. I'm Jasmine Rodriguez, a junior at Howard University, computer science and civil rights law. She lifted her chin proudly. Your work inspired me. I want to build tech that fights discrimination too. The words struck Devon deeply. For a moment, he saw himself years earlier, when discrimination was something he read about in case studies, never imagining he would one day dismantle it with technology. What do you hope to do after graduation? He asked. Expand this fight, Jasmine replied without hesitation. Into housing, healthcare, education, jobs. Anywhere bias steals opportunity. Tech companies like yours have the tools, and the duty to enforce fairness. Devon nodded, pride flickering in his eyes. Then don't wait for permission. Build it. Fight with everything you have. As their exchange ended, another figure emerged, a woman older, steady, her reputation preceding her. Dr. Beverly Williams, renowned civil rights attorney and advocate, moved through the crowd with quiet authority. Devon recognized her instantly. They had testified together at congressional hearings years before. Devon, Dr. Williams said warmly but firmly, the Civil Rights Technology Institute just secured a $50 million grant from the Ford Foundation, inspired by your model. We're expanding bias prevention systems into K-12 education nationwide. The news landed like another wave crashing over the crowd. Teachers, students, parents, all sectors touched. Devon's chest tightened, a rare flicker of emotion breaking through his composure. Education, he murmured. That's where it starts. Yes, Dr. Williams replied. And like airlines, districts resisted at first. But when they saw that bias detection didn't just prevent discrimination, but improved outcomes for every child, the resistance melted. Reducing discrimination lifts everyone. Reporters scribbled faster, cameras tilted closer, capturing Devon in the center of a movement that had grown beyond airlines, beyond one scandal. What started in Seat 2A had become a blueprint for dismantling systemic inequities everywhere. Near the counter, a young black man in a Pinnacle Airways uniform approached. His badge read Kevin Martinez, Customer Advocacy Specialist, a new role Pinnacle had rushed into existence since the scandal began. His demeanor was professional, his tone respectful but proud. Mr. Mitchell, Kevin said, I've worked 6 years in airline customer service. Your changes, your systems, they've transformed everything. We're no longer trained to make problems disappear. We're trained to solve them, to protect dignity, not just profits. I wanted to thank you personally. Devon shook his hand firmly, noting the difference. This wasn't tokenism. It was structural change in action. Behind them, Zoe's camera caught every word, her viewership skyrocketing again. Notifications erupted, CNN replaying live. BBC headline already up. TikTok edits trending worldwide. The revolution was no longer hypothetical. It was viral, it was personal, it was irreversible. And Devon Mitchell, once just a man standing in an aisle asking for his rightful seat, now stood at the center of a global shift. The same seat that sparked chaos now carried the weight of change. Hours later, Devon walked through the terminal toward his connecting flight. The buzz around him hadn't died, it had multiplied. Reporters still hovered nearby, passengers whispered his name as he passed, and airport staff eyed him with a mixture of awe and unease. What had started with a single confrontation had grown into a wave no one could ignore. At the gate, Devon approached the counter. The agent, a young black man named Kevin Martinez, handled the process smoothly. His professionalism wasn't just procedural, it radiated a new culture. Mr. Mitchell, Kevin said respectfully, your seat is confirmed. 2A, welcome back, and thank you. What you've done is changing everything for us. Devon nodded, recognizing the significance. 6 months ago, Kevin might have been told to smooth things over, to prioritize status over fairness. Now he represented something else, accountability built into the very DNA of the airline. As Devon boarded, he noticed the quiet difference immediately. The crew greeted every passenger with deliberate care, their smiles genuine, their tone respectful. This wasn't just service, It was the visible imprint of reforms already taking root. Sliding into seat 2A, the same cursed contested number that had set the world on fire, Devon allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. His phone buzzed non-stop. Messages from investors, civil rights leaders, even politicians. Notifications from around the world poured in. UK Parliament debating bias in airlines. UN preparing vote on global standards. TikTok #pinnacle shame surpasses 20 million views. On his laptop, Skitek's new Civil Rights Division dashboard lit up. In just 24 hours, over 2 million passenger interactions had been processed through the bias detection system. Hundreds of complaints flagged, dozens escalated and already resolved. For the first time in history, discrimination data wasn't hidden. It was live, visible, undeniable. Then came the voice over the intercom. Devon looked up sharply, recognizing it instantly. Sarah Chen, the very flight attendant who had once asked him to move, now stood at the front of the cabin. Her uniform was crisp, her voice steady, her presence intentional. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Pinnacle Airways Flight 1847, Sarah announced. "As we prepare for departure, I want to remind you of our commitment. Every passenger travels with dignity and respect, regardless of background or appearance." The cabin stirred with quiet recognition. She paused, eyes meeting Devon's for a brief but telling moment. 2 years ago, this very flight became the site of an incident that sparked change. Today, thanks to those who refused to accept unfair treatment and the technology that holds us accountable, this airline and this industry are different. Safer, fairer, better. Applause broke softly in pockets of the cabin. Devon exhaled, his chest rising with something heavier than relief, something closer to vindication. As the plane taxied forward, lifting into the sky, Devon glanced out the window at the city below. The same city where he had built Skitek. The same city where discrimination had once tried to tell him he didn't belong. Now his work was reshaping industries, laws, and lives. Sarah Chen's words still echoed in the cabin, but Devon's thoughts were already racing ahead, to healthcare, to housing, to education, to every industry where bias hid behind procedure. If I can change one system, he thought, I can change them all. The revolution wasn't just in the air anymore, it was everywhere. One viral moment had grown into a worldwide mandate. By the time Pinnacle Flight 1847 touched down on the West Coast, the movement had already outgrown Devon. What began as a confrontation in Seat 2A had become international law fodder, financial headlines, and the subject of late-night television. The ripple was unstoppable. Zoe Kim, once a journalism student with little more than a phone and a sharp instinct, had become an overnight sensation. Her live stream, raw and unfiltered, was replayed by every major outlet on Earth. Within weeks, she signed with a documentary studio, her project titled Seat 2A: The Day Accountability Took Flight. It would later win an Emmy. Elena Vasquez, seasoned and skeptical by nature, had filled notebook after notebook in the days following the flight. Her Washington Post feature, Discrimination at 30,000 Feet, went viral itself. It wasn't just reportage, it was history captured mid-beat. Months later, Eleanor stood on stage in New York, accepting a Pulitzer Prize. She spoke not of her pen, but of the people who had chosen not to look away. Meanwhile, inside Skitek headquarters, the revolution was no longer theory. The Civil Rights Technology Division had become the company's fastest-growing arm. Devon watched as government contracts rolled in, school districts, hospitals, police departments, all demanding bias detection systems that had once been considered impossible. Investors initially panicked, but soon realized what Devon already knew. Equity wasn't just moral, it was profitable. But the greatest shift came beyond corporations. The United Nations called an emergency session. Delegates debated for hours under the blue and white flag, Zoe's livestream clips projected on massive screens. One after another, ambassadors rose to speak, their words carrying the weight of nations. From Ghana to Canada, from Brazil to Japan, a common refrain echoed. This cannot remain an American problem. It is a human one. Devon watched the vote from his office, Kai at his side. The numbers climbed on the screen, nations pledging support for the International Fair Treatment in Travel Act. It wasn't just an airline law, it was the world's first binding legislation that required systemic accountability for discrimination across borders. The bill passed with 172 votes in favour. Applause thundered through the General Assembly. The chamber itself seemed to tremble. Kai exhaled, stunned. Devon, you just turned one seat dispute into global policy. Devon leaned back, his expression unreadable, but his voice calm. No, Kai. We did. Zoe, Elena, every passenger who refused to stay silent. Every person who filed a complaint and was ignored. Every person who's ever been told they don't belong. They built this. I just refuse to let it stay buried. News outlets erupted with headlines. From Seat 2A to the UN. Mitchell's movement becomes global standard. Civil Rights 2.0 arrives. For once, the world wasn't asking if the movement was real. The vote had made it undeniable. Devon stared at the screen, aware that the fight was far from over. But the tide had shifted, and there would be no turning back. The fight began in a seat, but it ended as a legacy. Weeks later, Devon Mitchell sat once more in Seat 2A. The cabin hummed softly around him, not with tension this time, but with order, care, and a deliberate sense of fairness that hadn't existed before. Passengers filed in quietly, greeted with respect regardless of their attire, accent, or appearance. What had once been a battleground now felt like proof of change. Sarah Chen walked the aisle, her presence transformed. No longer the nervous attendant trying to smooth things over, she had been reassigned as Pinnacle's Director of Passenger Dignity and Compliance, a new role Devon had insisted upon. When her eyes met his, there was no shame left, only determination. "Mr. Mitchell," she said gently, "we've completed the first round of industry-wide training. Already complaints are down 30%. The difference is real." Devon studied her for a moment, then nodded. "It's not about numbers, Sarah. It's about passengers walking off this plane feeling like they mattered. That's the real measure." She smiled faintly. "Understood. And thank you for not giving up on us." As Sarah moved on, Devon turned toward the window. Below, the world stretched vast and unyielding, its problems still immense, its inequities still alive. But for the first time, he felt the tide had shifted, pulled by something bigger than law, bigger than tech, by dignity itself. His phone buzzed again. A message from Kai. Global Schools Program launched today. Healthcare pilot begins next month. We're ahead of schedule. Devon exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and resolve in his chest. The work was just beginning, but the path was clear. As the engines roared to life, a passenger across the aisle whispered, "That's him, the one who changed everything." Devon didn't turn. He didn't need recognition. All he needed was the knowledge that the next time someone in his position stood in an aisle, ticket in hand, demanding fairness, they wouldn't stand alone. The plane lifted skyward, and with it a movement too heavy to ground. Seat 2A was no longer just a seat. It was a symbol, a reminder, and a promise. The revolution had taken flight, but its destination was far beyond the skies. It was a year later, and the echoes of Seat 2A had not faded. They had multiplied. Devon Mitchell stood at the podium of the United Nations headquarters in New York City, the same marble chamber where ambassadors had voted months earlier. This time, the flags of 193 nations waved behind him. Cameras filled every corner. Journalists jostled for space. He adjusted the microphone, his voice carrying calm gravity. A year ago, I was told to give up my seat. Today, I stand here not just as a CEO, but as a citizen of a world demanding fairness. What happened on Pinnacle Flight 1847 was not unique. It was simply caught on camera. The truth is, systemic discrimination exists in every industry, every country. But so does the power to dismantle it. The chamber erupted in applause, not polite but thunderous. Devon let it wash over him, but he wasn't here for applause. He was here for permanence. The Global Civil Rights in Technology Accord was projected behind him, pages of commitments signed by governments, corporations, and NGOs. For the first time in history, fairness wasn't just an ethical ideal. It was a coded requirement, written into algorithms, enforced by law, monitored by watchdogs with teeth. Airlines, banks, schools, hospitals, every system touched by data was now being reprogrammed to protect dignity. Devon stepped back as the first signatures were recorded. His mind flickered back to that day in the aisle, Victoria Hartwell's sneer, Sarah Chen's hesitation, Captain Rodriguez's compromise. None of them knew they were lighting a match that would blaze across the globe. Later, outside the chamber, reporters pressed forward. Elena Vasquez, now a Pulitzer laureate, raised her voice above the chaos. Mr. Mitchell, history will remember Seat 2A, but what do you hope people remember most about you? Devon paused. The cameras clicked. Zoe Kim's livestream numbers surged again. She had become a full-fledged filmmaker now, her documentary Seat 2A taught in classrooms worldwide. Devon's answer would not be forgotten. I don't want them to remember me, he said finally. I want them to remember the lesson. Dignity is not negotiable, respect is not optional, and justice will never come quietly. It must be demanded. The crowd roared, but Devon was already walking away, Kai at his side. You know, Kai said, scrolling through messages, Harvard just announced a Mitchell Scholarship for Civil Rights Tech. Full tuition for students building systems like yours. First cohort starts this fall. Devon smiled faintly. Good. The fight needs younger hands now. Mine have carried it this far. Theirs will carry it further. That evening, Devon returned to the airport. It was fitting. Airports had once been the stage of his humiliation, then the stage of his power. Now they were reminders of progress. He passed through security without a second glance from agents who now underwent bias audits weekly. He walked past lounges redesigned to be accessible to all, regardless of income. Every corner bore the invisible mark of systems he had forced into existence. At the gate, he boarded without fuss. When he sat in Seat 2A once more, the leather felt no different, but the meaning was transformed. The passengers around him carried quiet awareness. They weren't just passengers anymore. They were witnesses to a promise. Across the aisle, a young boy tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mama, is that him?" The man from the news. His mother hushed him, but Devon turned, offering a kind smile. "Yes," he said softly, "but don't remember me. Remember what happened here, and remember what you deserve. Respect, always." The engines roared, the plane lifted, and as the city lights faded beneath the clouds, Devon closed his eyes, not in weariness, but in resolve. Seat 2A was no longer a battleground. It was a legacy.